transgenders is the same critique that they used against men, which is that men are some sort of creepy people who are trying to disturb the normal routine of women who are just normal creatures minding their own businesses. The second thing that we found was that feminists now, in order to weaken the argument of transgenders, say that men and women have almost the same rights, which is a curious thing because second wave feminists do not agree with that even today. The only reason why they say that in the settings in which they have to weaken the transgender argument is because by arguing for such, they are able to show that the only basis for the men who are transitioning into women is to, in some way or the other, some form or the other, harass women or try to uh, bring their fetish into action in some or the other way. Now we will look at the interview further and look at how Posie Parker, that is, defends her position and what other things she has to say to gain an insight into the minds of TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists. Let's see.
And you say invade women's spaces. So what do you mean by that? Is it changing rooms? Is it toilets? Is it
It's all of them. It's all of the things that we've carved out of a society that we say that's for one sex or that's for another. So any
It is important to note here that she says that this includes all the spaces that the society has carved out as separate for men and women. Now you will see that her point is not about few spaces or some selective spaces, but all the spaces which the society has dictated to be separate. Posie Parker is now making a conservative argument, the argument that the conservatives were making years ago. And the reason why she is making this argument is because now the feminists are the new conservatives. So earlier, when the second wave feminists were fighting for their ideology, the, the, the dictates of the society, or anything that the society dictated, which called for gender segregation, if it did not pass the feminist test, was deemed as an mm, unethical or immoral segregation. And the society was doing that because it was patriarchal or it was misogynistic. The society had no uh, right to demand that the separate spaces which the society felt were necessary should remain because it harmed the individual rights of the woman who had to adjust according to the society's whims. But now, when she's in the power, or her ideology is in the power, and her ideology is the status quo, she is defending the exact same standard. She is not even trying to argue from any other perspective, but simply using the conservative argument directly, saying or implying that the society which has decided this segregation is justified in doing so and is not harming the individual rights of the people by doing so. The segregation approved by society is something that we should hold to be sacred. This is completely against the argument that the feminists used to give back in the day. But it also shows the women who continue to believe that the society is misogynistic, even now, more misogynistic than it is misandrist, would find this statement to be contradicting to their views. Because if this statement is accepted, then it becomes bizarre to think of why she would allow the society, which is misogynistic, to have the power to dictate separate spaces for men and women. The reason why she is allowing that is because she knows that the society is not like that. At least now, society is less misogynistic. It is more gynocentric.
Time that a woman goes into a toilet, you know, it's a different experience to a man the majority of the time. For a start, we have more things to remove in order to do it, so we're much more vulnerable because we're in a bigger state of undress most of the time.
This is now uh, something that shows that while the feminists have now become conservatives or allied with the conservatives, they still make the same stupid arguments that they used to make before. This is such a stupid argument because it assumes that the people who are in the toilets or washrooms are vulnerable from the very get go. But that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to point out that something which takes longer for some people is actually an issue of concern unless you believe that the very place in which that thing is threatening. But washrooms and toilets are not threatening places, especially in the modern Western nations. There might be places in which you may feel embarrassment in front of other people, but they are definitely not the places in which you are very, very, very likely to face something horrible. And the reason for that is if you do not factor in the fact that uh, they are just rooms, another type of rooms in which men and women can go, only then you would be able to make these kind of arguments. But in those kind of arguments, you have to ascribe a special status to these rooms by deeming them as different rooms than any other place in which men and women can go. Why toilets or washrooms are specially secluded places than other secluded places? Why it is different? Why, for example, a crime is easily committed, could be easily committed in a restroom rather than any other room which only contains one man and a woman? Obviously, in both the situations, the man, if he wants to be bad to the woman in some or the other form, can be. Why is one? Why does one make women more vulnerable than the other?
And we also have other functions in a toilet. So I don't want to share that with a man. And quite frankly, men's toilets and women's toilets are very different spaces. You are a lot more dirty, generally, as a group of people.
Well, I think
Now you can see that she does not have any problem in using the stereotype again, saying something which she cannot back. The funnier thing is that it's the women's toilets which are actually far worse because of, even ignoring all the other things, the existence of periods. And it is not something that is very hard to see or to experience. Even if you have, for example, a common toilet in your homes, in your houses, you will see that because women undergo periods, uh, the smell that comes out of the toilets after the woman had gone there is not particularly pleasing. And in the restrooms, you will find that it is not often that in those washrooms and toilets there is some thing which cleans the odor easily. This statement actually makes no sense at all, but it does show that she is willing to use stereotypes so bluntly.
Well, I'm triggered.
It's undeniable reality.
Yeah.
I've gone into both toilets just to make sure. Sorry, Posie, it wasn't the safe space when I was there. But
and just like you, no charges were brought.
not yet, anyway. But Posie, you use quite a... I would say, a lot of people would say some of the language that you've just used, and you're perfectly entitled, in my opinion, to use it, but a lot of people would consider it inflammatory. So when you talk about people pretending to be the other sex, about lying about those things, both Francis and I, we work with trans people in comedy. We've had a trans guest on the show. I know personally people who are trans, right? And there is such a thing as gender dysphoria, right? Would you accept that?
I think there is very rare cases there may be something that people label gender dysphoria, yes.
And the theory currently is scientifically that something happens in utero where the fetus is bombarded with certain...
Is there that theory?
I believe there is, yeah.
Peer-reviewed, quality... No, there isn't.
There isn't.
No.
Okay. Well, let's say there is the assertion then.
Actually, there is peer-reviewed theories about this phenomenon. And she obviously doesn't know that because she hasn't read the literature of the side that she opposes. Now, whether that is quality literature is something to consider. But the feminist literature itself is not quality, so that point is rather moot. If you look at that, there are many journals which specifically advance feminist ideologies, which are specifically designated for feminists to write for and advance their theories. This itself shows that without this leg to stand on, the feminist ideology and the feminist philosophy in various fields will find it hard when it is scrutinized, to find it hard to sustain itself when it is scrutinized by a keen eye.
Yes.
That is the case, okay? So there are people, and I know people who are like this, who say, look, from the age of 3, I've known I was the opposite sex. That has never wavered. I've been that way. And the earlier I transitioned, the better it would have been for me. I'm 50 years old now. I am the opposite sex to the sex with which I was born. And I could not be happier. And my life is now completely different. I fully transitioned chemically and physically. I've had the surgery. I've been reassigned. Is that someone pretending to be the opposite? I mean, they've gone to quite a lot of trouble, haven't they, to
well,
pretend?
that would be a different... It's immaterial whether or not that person is absolutely right in their belief. I don't really know how we could explore that to find out if they are right. But it's immaterial to me and women's spaces whether or not that person really believes it or just gets aroused. It doesn't... that doesn't matter to me. It's still women's spaces and they are not coming in.
And here you will see what I was saying before. She says that she points out two possibilities, that the person really believes that he is of the opposite sex or that person is aroused. She says that she cannot distinguish between the two persons because there's no real way to know the difference. Now the point here is this, why she's bringing the concept of arousal here. The reason for that is pretty easy, and this will be the main point to be discussed here, and the rest of the video we will discuss in the next session. Women have used the male arousal to make arguments for themselves for so long that you won't even remember the time when they started doing that. The records of it are from ancient historical sources as well. But let's not go there. Let's look at the contemporary time in which she has made the statement. Women have always faulted male arousal and tried to use it as a wedge to push for things that they want to push for, because they know that society, especially the traditionalists, become very upset when they feel that the women are being objectified or sexualized. If you meet a conservative dad, you'll see that he gets charged up all in anger. Or at least the stereotype is like that when he encounters a person who is chasing his daughter or sexualizing her or objectifying her. The dads, the brothers, and the normal people are very protective. A woman prevent them from being sexualized and objectified without their consent. She knows the women have that power. Because she knows the women that have power, it forms the crux of her argument. We never used to ask whether if the women who wanted to get in the male spaces, like the offices, were aroused by men or not. We never said that the reason why women were entering male spaces whenever they were demanding it so was because they wanted to be close to the males. That they wanted, uh, let's say the best way that I can, is for me, they wanted the males to have sex with them. I'm not using any word that might offend some people, but you get what I mean. Were we questioning the woman's sexual fetishes as being the reason behind their coming into the male spaces? Were we even thinking about that and presenting it as valid arguments? Even the traditionalists were not doing that, who were in the opposition of feminists at that time. The people who did not agree with women entering male spaces were not making that argument. Now, you have to remember that the second wave feminists also said, or also fought for the idea that women were also sexual creatures, and that they also felt uh, sexual urges, and thus fulfilling them was not wrong. The arousal of women was not something that was demeaning. It was a cherishable thing. It was empowering for the woman. It allowed women to enjoy and gain pleasure. Second wave feminists argue women's sexuality to be liberated. So their key argument was that the woman arousal was also a thing, that women also were sexually aroused. If we take that point, isn't it surprising that if women also get aroused, if women also feel sexual urges, and the feminists themselves are saying that, and this urge is so strong that women fought a revolution to be able to satisfy that urge, the sexual revolution, then why? Why we are only looking at the arousal of the males when trying to figure out their motives in entering certain spaces? Why we are prone to look at a man in a creepy way if he enters into a space where women are, but not vice versa? Why is that? Now, of course, I will give an answer to that later in our next session, but it is worth considering. If we believe now that women also are sexual creatures, they also feel sexual urges, that their sexuality is also something which is real, and we see that almost every day, then why? Why we are pointing to male fetishes as a reason or as something to be careful of while deciding to allow males in women's spaces? Why the arousal of males matter? Maybe just to look at the setting. There are two males here, and there is Posie Parker. Now, can one say that Posie Parker is aroused by these two males? Maybe yes. Can someone say that one of these males is aroused by presence of Posie Parker? Maybe yes. Can someone say that one of these guys is aroused by the presence of the another guy? Maybe yes. But should it matter? Should it matter to liberals of all? But now it would matter to moderates and to the traditionalists, because the conservative dads would get you if you sexually objectify their daughters, and the conservative brothers would get you, and the moderates would get you, and the liberals would get you, but not in any other case. The woman's sexuality is the chief battleground of all the ideologies, and the reason for that is not because women's sexuality is such an advanced and complex thing, but because there's a lot of deception involved by all the sides. The deception is visible from the very aspect that in a society that has reached the levels of sexual freedom and openly brags about it, thinking that it is better than the Islamic societies because it allows sexual freedom and it allows fulfillment of sexual arousal, is using sexual arousal as a way to discredit the argument of the other side. Now, she says that she does not care about whether the man is aroused or whether the man actually believes that he is of the opposite sex. But that shouldn't matter. Why bring arousal into the equation? What is the first thing that comes in your mind? Why even bring that issue? Of all the thousands of reasons why a man may want to enter into a woman's space, why think about arousal? Unless you believe that it is specifically a big problem, that it is worth mentioning, along with the other thing that is being talked about. The arousal issue, or the argument that is called the rape argument. The rape arguments are the series of arguments in which the presence of rape or sexual assault or sexual objectification of women is used to defend any number of things, any number of extra privileges that women have. And we'll decode that in the next session. So if you want to watch the first part of this video, you can watch it to learn a background of how TERFs frame their arguments. This actually gives you an insight. This video actually gives you an insight into how TERFs think about very specific issues in the transgender ideology. We are now moving deeper and deeper from the background, from the surface, into the ocean of the TERF transgender civil war. And it's interesting to say the least, but it's also informative. And that information is something we need. And the reason why we need that is because we want that to hear these things from the mouths of these people themselves, because no one else would be believed by the people. But only those who are believed to be the champions of the civil society. It is unfortunate that we have to rely on these people. But that's our fate. And we are not shy to do that in order to at least give an insight into the real nature of the world polity and the constant war between the masculinity and the femininity. So let's end this session right now. We will cover the rest of the video in other sessions and see if we can make head and toe of the critique of TERFs against the transgenders. Bye.